All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It is a doozy today. It is day 28, episode 29, 40 days of 4VKM. Very big episode because a lot of the stuff that happened in this episode that I showed in 2022, it's all relevant today. When I did the special announcement, emergency press conference video, when the Vince McMahon allegations came out, I told people, go back and watch this episode. It's called Conquer the Darkness 2, Macrodosing for VKM. It's the sequel to Conquer the Darkness Uno, right? Which we did a video on. I think that was like the 5th for VKM. So we'll have the link in that in the description if you want to check that out beforehand. Before watching the sequel, always a good idea. So it's called, again, Conquer the Darkness 2, Macrodosing for VKM. It came out on June 27th, 2022, 10 days after Vince McMahon stepped down as CEO on June 17th, 2022, right? Timestamp 1502. So add them up, you know what you get there. So the macrodosing for VKM part is because Barstool Sports, who we talked about a couple times on the program, is they open up the video. They have a show, Macrodosing, and it's basically their guys talking about certain conspiracies and whatnot, right? You got PFT on there, Billy Football, a couple other people too. So you have the scene opens up. They're talking about JFK. So when I found out Barstool had a conspiracy podcast, I was like, let me see what they said about JFK. I mean, you can't have a conspiracy podcast without JFK, right? So, checked it out, found, sure enough, they have one, right? So I was like, well, what are they seeing here? And it was, I think, released the same year, maybe the year before. It starts off, in my video, they're talking about how, JFK had a lot of enemies. And, good example is how he wanted to end the Vietnam War. And I show that clip from 13 Days when, the generals are in there and JFK and I think Bobby are like, telling them, we're not going to do what you want. And then they go storming out and they go, those GD Kennedys, right? So kind of lining that up with what the Barstool guys were saying there. And then somebody asked the question, they go, can somebody explain the connection between QAnon and JFK Jr.? And again, let me just say something because I get this a lot in the comments. I know there's no such thing as QAnon, right? But I use that phrase because that's the phrase that is used in the media when people are talking about this, right? So I'm going to continue to use it in that context. Yes, I know that there's Q. Yes, I know that there's Anons, right? But whenever the fake news or, not even the fake news, just mainstream, whatever, is talking about this stuff, that's what they call it. So we're going to roll with it. So don't get caught up in the semantics, right? So they get asked, they say, hey, who is, what's the connection between QAnon and JFK Jr., right? And, they kind of throw cold water on it. They're like, well, the theory is that there was a deep state that took out JFK. And that theory is actually very credible, but the QAnon people kind of hijacked it and ruined it. And they made it not fun to talk about anymore, right? Which is BS. We've actually probably breathed new life into it and taken it to a level that's never been taken to before in the last 60 years since this has happened, right? So, so I disagree with that statement on that. But I do agree that there was a deep state involved, and this is really all about taking them out. And it's funny, Gene Ho just did a video. Gene Ho's the new editor-in-chief of the rebooted George magazine. And what did he say? He said that, this whole movement that we're in right now, it was started by JFK Jr. during the original George magazine era. So I found it very interesting that he said that, Mr. Gene Ho. And shout out to Gene Ho. So, so then we show you, they start talking about John. Like, well, we're, how did this name come about, right? And they speculate. They're like, well, you had JFK, and then you had JFK Jr., and when you have two Johns, you just can't call them John and John, so, you call them Jack, right? Which, yeah, I've never heard anybody call JFK Jr. Jack, but we'll roll with it, right? but then PFT steps in and he goes, or they call him John John, which is what they called him. And that's coincidentally what President Trump would call him in certain interviews, right? Reminded me of the Chris Wallace interview that he did in the Oval Office, which for some reason the windows were tinted Tiffany blue in that interview, or they were shining through Tiffany blue light, which was very interesting. But Trump points at the Resolute desk and he goes, John John used to be here. Remember John John, right? And he says something like he was a friend of mine or something like that. So who else did he show the Resolute desk to? We're talking about Barstool Sports. He showed it to Dave Portnoy. And Dave Portnoy was with Mariano Rivera. This is the day that Dave interviewed President Trump while he was running for re-election. And President Trump just had to show him the Resolute desk, right? Didn't mention John John, but had to show him the desk, right? And that desk is really synonymous. When people think about that desk, they think about that picture of JFK Jr. And it's weird. Joe Biden has a picture of that picture on his Resolute desk, which I find very interesting. Or I don't know if it was like, you can't really see it close up. So I don't know if it's that picture or if it's a recreated picture that he did with one of his grandkids or something. I don't know, but it's interesting to say the least. Now, from all accounts, from what we understand, Junior hated using the phrase John John. He hated the name John John. So, be the last time you hear me say it in these videos. But, not a big fan of the JJ, right? So what else, right? As President Trump is telling Chris Wallace about this desk, he's talking about the history of it. He goes, John Kennedy sat at this desk, a couple other people. And the phrase that caught my mind, he goes, just a lot of people that I have tremendous respect for, right? So President Trump had tremendous respect for President Kennedy, and I think we all know why that is. Now, PFT, going back to macrodosing, he talks about, there's this theory that JFK was going up against the global bankers, but there's not really any proof of that, he says. Well, I rebuttal that, sir. There was proof, and that all you have to do is look at Executive Order 11110, right? 11110, which basically was bringing silver back to the forefront. It was going heavy after the Federal Reserve. Again, reminds me of the debtclock.org comms. We're seeing a lot of JFK stuff on that, a lot of silver talk on that, a lot of debt-free currency talk on that. What happened as soon as he got assassinated, Lyndon B. Johnson, that son of a bitch, he reverses it, right? He gets rid of it. So, screw Lyndon B. Johnson. He did have a lot of enemies, and I think LBJ is towards the top of the list. Who else is towards the top of the list? Another future president, George Herbert Walker Bush. Now, I showed in a couple episodes before, Gridiron Gang, that Barstool Sports was founded in Milton, Massachusetts, 2003. You know who else was founded in Milton, Massachusetts? Years before that? George Herbert Walker Bush, right? And that train map that I always show you guys, the red line train map, if you keep going south, you get to Milton. There's a Milton stop on that, right? So, unfortunately, on our cool little train map, right, Andrew, JFK, Savin, Field, unfortunately, we have Milton, which, was the home of Bush, or the birthplace of Bush. But you know what? It was also the birthplace of Barstool. So it's like those guys kind of reclaimed it. So appreciate that, Dave. Appreciate that. So where was George Bush? They bring this up in the interview or in the macrodosing podcast where they say, George Bush was asked where he was on the day JFK got assassinated, and he had stated that he didn't remember. And they all agree. They're like, that's not the right answer. Like, that's like forgetting where you were when 9/11 happened, if you lived through it. Or forgetting where you were when JFK died, right? Like, our parents or, that generation, they all remember where they were. Exactly where they were when they found out that news, right? Just like we all remember where we were when 9/11 happened. And shout out to the rubber duck because he was right down there, ground zero, as that that happened, and he survived it, thank God. But you know, so many people that were impacted by that area, you know. So we are with you. We are with you. Hopefully, one day the truth comes out about what happened on 9/11. So here's the other interesting George Bush connection. I mean, you can't make this up. And this is one of the things I did learn from this macrodosing for VKM. You remember the photo of Lee Harvey Oswald with the rifle on Time magazine, right? Well, who took that photo, right? It was actually George H.W. Bush's roommate in college's uncle, named George de Morenshit. I'm going to call it Morenshit. It's probably not how it's said, but it's spelt kind of that way. I think it's Schnit or something like that. I'm going to call him George de Morenshit. He's Morenshit, right? And when he died, his wife came forward to the authorities and provided that photo, right? That guy was friends with Lee Harvey Oswald, right? So you have George H.W. Bush's roommate's uncle was friends with Lee Harvey Oswald and took the photo of Lee Harvey Oswald holding the rifle, allegedly, that killed John F. Kennedy. So you can't make that up, right? So we always talk about George Magazine and how, you know, why did he pick the name George? Now on the first cover he put George Washington. Smoke screen, it's about George Washington. We're going to make politics cool again, right? Or he was telling people who killed his dad, George, right? And there's a couple Georges. You have George H.W. Bush, who couldn't remember where he was, and he just so happened to be in the Dallas area that day. And you also had George de Morenshit, who, you know, took the photo of Lee Harvey Oswald holding the rifle, right? Now, what's interesting about the George H.W. Bush being in Dallas theory is that President Trump recently retruthed a video. And a lot of it had the JFK assassination in the beginning of it. And it even showed the picture that I've shown in these videos of George Bush outside the book depository. So, you know, it's almost like Trump's confirming, yeah, Bush was there when JFK got whacked. All right, so, you know, what's cool about this video is that I had gone up to Boston for my birthday this year in 2022. And as I always talk about, birthday is June 17th. And so 617, I was born in Boston. Boston is the 617 area code. I was born right near the Andrew train station, right near the Savin Hill train, right in that whole, right in the mix. That's where I was born right there. I was like dropped off from somewhere, from M42 maybe, and I just landed, precisely in, you know, right in the middle of this train map on 617, in 617, right? So, and what's interesting about that is, that night, I went and did some research. I was like, I wonder what if WWF was showing anything that night, June 17th. And I found some results from, I forget the show. Was it WWF Superstars maybe? Or it was one of those shows, right? And June 17th, 1987, looked it up. And sure enough, there's a match, because they would record matches and then put them all together on a show. So it might be different matches in different cities on the same show. Back then, it wasn't live like it is today. And what's super weird to me is that there's a women's tag team match in that show from the Boston Garden in Boston. And it's a women's tag team match. And one of the women competing had my mother's name, right? So it's like, you know, I'm just looking back and I'm like, wow, what all these freaking wonderful coincidences just perfectly line up to have me in the perfect place at all times to be able to tell this story that is now even more relevant because for VKM, you have the entire media apparatus, including the wrestling fake news, that is just totally against VKM, right? And there's only one person out there that's still for them. Until we see what happens, right? We got to see what happens. You know, and actually there's three. Shout out to the Tate brothers, Andrew and Tristan. they know what's going on, and they're probably the only other ones that I've seen that have kind of called baloney on some of the stuff that's going on. All right, so back to 617. So I go back to Boston for 617 for my birthday, and I wanted to visit the JFK Presidential Library, see it with new eyes. I hadn't been there since I was a kid, right? So I was like, I want to go there, see it with new eyes, really take in the whole experience. So you see a lot of clips throughout the video from the library, actually. Like when, earlier when I was talking about the Resolute desk, they have a mock Resolute desk at the library, right? And what's very interesting is that they called that the seat of power. There's a sign there, and I put it in the video, and it just says seat of power. And it said something along the lines of, JFK loved being the president, right? Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't love being the president? So, 617. I'm in 617, and we get the news, I think, maybe a day or two beforehand, or maybe it was that day. These allegations come out about Vince McMahon, where he got in trouble for a $3 million hush money payment that he had to make to a woman. And this is the same woman that is suing him now in this lawsuit. So what's the interesting thing about this, right? It's June 17th. So he steps down on June 17th, my birthday of all days, right? But the woman's first day in WWE was also June 17th, 2019, right? So it's 3 years from the day, her first day in WWE, which was June 17th. And who picks that day? I have a feeling Vince McMahon picked that day for some reason. Why? What's the significance of it? Let's keep going a little deeper, right? So all the news picks it up that day. Vince McMahon stepping down from WWE. If you pull up the CNN clip, and it's dated June 17th, 2022, right? They open up with the same exact clip that I show in the video that came out on June 17th, the exact year before. So on June 17th, 2021, I dropped Removing the Virus 2, which we covered a couple episodes ago. So I cover that episode. At the part where I transitioned to WrestleMania kind of coming back, it's the same clip, same words, same everything that they use in the CNN clip on June 17th, 1 year later, right? So I thought that was very interesting. What a sync there. Triple H, right? So Triple H, I want to say this is 2011. Triple H comes out. Vince McMahon is in the ring. And this is the famous speech where he's telling people, he goes, you guys don't understand why I do things. I do things for, I'm thinking long term. I'm thinking, he's like, you don't understand why I do the things that I do now, but one day you will, and one day you'll appreciate it, right? Very prophetic words from Vince McMahon. Let's hope they pan out, right? So, Vince is about to fire John Cena in this situation because I swear it gets weird. So John Cena had a match with CM Punk, and if CM Punk's contract was up at this time, right? So if CM Punk wins, then he was going to leave the WWE with the WWE Championship. That was the threat, right? And Vince obviously didn't want that to happen, so he told John Cena to maybe motivate him a little bit more. He goes, John Cena, if you lose that match, I'm going to fire you, right? So who debuts in this match on WWE television? It's a guy named John Laurinaitis, or Big Johnny as they like to call him. John Laurinaitis was the senior vice president, I believe, of talent relations. And he makes his debut on WWE television with Vince McMahon at that match where he would fire John Cena if he didn't win. Now CM Punk ends up winning the match. So what's the next move then? The next night on Raw, Vince is going to fire John Cena, right? And so John Laurinaitis, what's the deal with him? He's the other defendant in this lawsuit that Vince is dealing with right now, right? And he just recently came out and was like, oh no, I'm a victim too. I don't know how this thing's going to play out, but what's very interesting about it is that if you go read John Laurinaitis' statement from his lawyer and you go read Vince McMahon's statement that he put out, it's almost the same exact statement, except John Laurinaitis' lawyer now is basically saying, oh no, Laurinaitis is innocent and Vince was the bad guy. He was John was a victim of Vince as well, right? So I don't know the strategy. I don't know how that's going to play out. But all I'm telling you is this guy that's the defendant, right? He debuted the day before this speech that I'm about to lay out for you. So Triple H comes out. Triple H had taken on a bigger responsibility backstage in the corporate office and whatnot. His in-ring career is kind of winding up, right? And he comes out because Vince is about to fire John Cena, right? And John Cena is the biggest star in WWE, and these guys don't want, the board of directors, it wouldn't be good business to fire John Cena. So Triple H comes out dressed in a suit, and Triple H says that there was an emergency meeting with the board this morning, and the board has lost confidence in Vince McMahon, and as a result, they filed an injunction on him, and they've removed him, and they've appointed somebody else to take over. And who would be taking over? Triple H. Who's Triple H married to? Stephanie McMahon, Vince's daughter, right? So what happens? 2022. Vince steps down. June 17th, 2022. Who takes over for his position? Stephanie. Stephanie becomes the CEO and the new chairwoman of the board. Just like what happened in Storyline, right? When Vince finally leaves in July, I think, because he stayed on in control of creative for that next month, I think. Who takes over creative? Triple H. Just like what happened when they did the Storyline, right? So you have, they're telling you the story. They're telling you the story of what's going to happen in 11 years from now, right? And it's happened in the past too. Back in 2000, they did a storyline where Triple H and Stephanie took over for Vince, right? And Vince was kind of exiled out for a short period. So it's just crazy, right? Now you have Vince. He's wearing a salmon suit. You never really saw Vince wear this suit before. It stands out. It's a pink suit. We call it salmon suit, right? Salmon suit equals 143. So salmon suit, Vince is wearing this, right? And as I'm doing this research, there's only one other salmon suit that I recall. And that salmon suit was the one that Mark Henry wore 2 years later. When did Mark Henry wear that suit, and why was he wearing that suit? Mark Henry came out to give a retirement speech, right? He was going to retire from WWE after being there for, since like 96, right? So it's 2013 he does this. So Mark Henry comes out on June 17th, 2013, calls John Cena out to the ring, says he's going to retire. Everybody's giving him a standing ovation. And as, John Cena is celebrating with them, Mark Henry pump fakes, picks Cena up, gives him the world's strongest slam, and he faked his retirement, right? Which is interesting because Vince ended up faking his retirement also. But what was Mark Henry wearing? He was wearing the salmon suit, right? So salmon suit, Mark Henry faked his retirement on June 17th. You had Vince McMahon fake his retirement on June 17th to later come back. They're both wearing a salmon suit. Interesting, isn't it? And nobody else has worn salmon suits that I can recall in WWE, right? Maybe nowadays Seth Rollins has worn one because he wears a different color suit like every damn day. But there's no salmon suit that stands out, right? You had those two. You had Vince, and when he got kicked out of WWE in Storyline by Triple H, and you have Mark Henry when he faked his retirement on June 17th. So wild stuff here, right? So as the news media is going crazy about all of this stuff, they can't help but drag Trump into it, right? Just like they're doing now too. I'll talk about that. Well, let's just talk about it now. Vince's building where he met this woman at, right? He was staying at, or he was living in Trump Park, Stamford, right? So there's a Trump property in Stamford, Connecticut that he was living at. 2021, they changed the name. So Vince is living in a Trump property, right? What have I been saying for 40? They've been working together for 40 years, and he just so happens to be living in one of his buildings as this whole thing goes down. In the lawsuit, who introduces him to the woman? It's the building manager. It's the property manager of the building that Vince lives in, the Trump building, right? Which is run by the Trump organization. So it's a Trump employee that introduces Vince to this woman. Isn't this wild, right? It's wild, right? So the news, they can't help themselves. They have to drag Trump into it, right? It's the biggest story of the day. Vince McMahon stepping down as CEO. They're showing clips of WrestleMania 23. He even fought Donald Trump at WrestleMania. Da, da, da. You know, they're showing him get his head shaved, right? And then I'm showing you guys all the clips of years past WWE where Vince is flaunting his affairs on television, from 2001, right? 2001, Tori Wilson. He's backstage with Tori Wilson, and he says, you want to play games, Tori, right? Games are fun. Games are fun, right? There's that drop. And who catches him? His wife, Linda McMahon. So, they're showing you guys this for years and years and years. And, it's just insane. You have Paul Heyman. Remember Heyman, right? He gives this speech where he's calling him out for it. I actually think I was at this speech because it was I think it was in Boston before Survivor Series maybe. And in 2001, and Heyman ends up getting choked out by Taz at the end of it. And he's giving him this speech about how you flaunt your affairs in front of your wife, right? And I'm showing you clips of him making out with Trish Stratus right in front of his wife because he had his wife drugged up so she couldn't do anything, right? Because he drove her crazy. So they had to sedate her. And that was a story that went all the way to WrestleMania 17. So you have, they're showing all these affairs. There's another clip I show you where Triple H busts in on Vince, and he's got a woman sitting down next to him on the couch. He's all cozy and stuff to her on the couch, right? Triple H barges in. He stands up. They both stand up, acting like nothing was going on there. What's behind Vince? It's a magazine cover with him on the cover, and in the bottom left corner, there's that magic number again, 17 protein tips or something like that, because it's a muscle and fitness magazine, right? So Vince is on the cover of one year, it says 18, another year it says 17. What are the odds of that, right? So it's just crazy. It's crazy, guys. Triple H and Stephanie take over, right? News is covering that. Stephanie is now in charge. She's gonna take over CEO and chairwoman. And how old is she when this happens? 45 years old. It couldn't be 44 or 46. It had to be that damn number 45 again, right? So, unbelievable. Now, it reminds me, as this whole thing's coming out, VK had tweeted one time, do you smear? Right? So smear can mean a couple different things. Do you smear, do you put smear on your bagel, right? Or do you smear shit? Or do you smear somebody's good name? And just look at the playbook, right? So again, certain people I've seen, they give some people a pass when allegations like this come up, but nobody is giving Vince McMahon a pass. And it's because all this stuff was on WWE television, so they're all conditioned to think this is real, this is really how he is, right? And I'm not saying he's a perfect saint. He's not a freak. He doesn't like the ladies or whatnot, right? But I'm saying he's not a human trafficker. That's for damn sure. So you have, who else is getting smeared this time? Trump's dealing with the whole Stormy Daniels thing. Same thing, hush money payment that somebody was able to get her to break the NDA, basically, right? You have Elon. Elon gets accused by somebody at SpaceX. Same deal. You have Dave Portnoy. He gets hit with a hit piece with Business Insider, right? What do these guys all have in common? They kind of go against the mainstream narrative, right? They kind of say stuff that, the powers that be don't like, right? Like whether it's Portnoy saying that COVID is stupid and Fauci's an idiot, or Elon buying Twitter, or Trump being Trump, right? It's just, they have the greatest hits. Hey, we want to take down our enemies. We want to do as much people as possible. Bring out the women lawsuits, right? It's just am I saying anything that's not true? Now, the rebuttal will be, oh, well, these guys deserve it. They're sickos, da-da-da. How come none of the known sickos ever get in trouble, right? How come the judge that awarded $83.3 million to E. Jean Carroll, how come he threw out the case between Virginia Giuffre and Prince Andrew? Bad Andrew, right? Not this Andrew, right? Which is kind of funny. Boston.com did a little thing recently. And, the train map, I always say, Next Stop Andrew. That's my Twitter name, Next Stop Andrew, because the stop after JFK is Andrew. I was born right in that era. And they renamed it. They were like, hey, help us rename, in case not real, but help us rename all the train stops, right? And they renamed my stop, Prince Andrew was not here. Frustrating. It's frustrating that guy shares my name. But anyway, I'll show you something else, right? Because I didn't know when else we would get this in here, right? But all these allegations coming out with Vince. He's with all these different sorts of women. It was on television. It's allegated behind the scenes, or alleged behind the scenes. Sorry, I just made up a new word there. But there was a scene, there was a big mystery several years back where it was Vince had a bastard son. So Vince gets sued because I think the mother of the bastard son had come forward or something like that. And they start an investigation, and it becomes like a riddle, right? So for weeks and weeks, they're given clues as far as who the bastard son could be. And all they know is that it's a current WWE superstar, right? Now, at the time, you remember I've talked about Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy was the winner of the Money in the Bank match at WrestleMania 23, where Trump and McMahon fought, right? So you have Trump and McMahon in the main event, and then you have a Kennedy win one of the signature matches. Mr. Kennedy wins the Money in the Bank, right? So that same Mr. Kennedy was like supposed to be the bastard son, but some stuff had happened behind the scenes. It didn't end up being him, right? And they had it all lined up because he was from Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I think this show where they were going to do the reveal was in Green Bay, Wisconsin, right? Who's it end up being? Somebody else from Green Bay, Wisconsin, but not who Vince was anticipating or the fans were anticipating. And even when you go back and watch that video, that promo where they're about to do the reveal, fans are chanting in the background, Kennedy, Kennedy. So I just always thought it was funny. Vince doing a bastard son angle with supposedly a guy named Kennedy, but it doesn't end up being Kennedy. It ends up being a little fella called Hornswoggle. And, I just had to check the gematria on Hornswoggle, and it's 143. And back to that salmon suit. Salmon suit's 143. So probably nothing there. But interesting. So, so Vince comes out. So he steps down as CEO. It's a Friday on June 17th, and SmackDown's on Friday, right? So he comes out and he gives his speech, and it's very short to the point. He doesn't really address the allegations or anything like that. It's almost like I don't know, like he was saying goodbye. That's kind of how I felt too. You remember we covered the Pat McAfee interview that he did? He said, if I don't have a chance to ever say thank you, I just want to be able to say thank you. He says that on the Pat McAfee interview. But he comes out and he goes, there's 4 words that are in the WWE signature. Now, I show a clip from years WWE past, and the ending of the signature and the name of the signature at the time was called The World is Watching. Have you heard that phrase before, right? And it's Jim Ross, JR, saying, the world is watching, right? So that for a very long time was the WWE signature. Then they changed it. What did they change it to? They changed it to then, now, forever, together. And Vince is talking that. He says that. He goes, then, now, forever, together. Like, we're going to be together forever in this thing, right? Now, the word together. To get her. Interesting, right? So Vince comes back that following Monday Night Raw. Now everybody's like, what the hell is Vince doing? Why is he coming out giving these random, speeches or whatnot? It might have been a couple weeks after. It might not have been right away. I felt like it was the next Monday, but maybe I'm wrong. And he comes out, and actually, before I get to that, when he came out on SmackDown, he was wearing a pink tie. Now, Trump and Vince were both wearing a pink tie at WrestleMania 23, I believe, so I thought that was interesting. And then the other thing that's interesting is as he's leaving the ring, he shakes hands with the guy wearing all pink, and he's got a pink sign, right? So I'm like, what's the pink, meaning? Maybe you guys know, and you can put it in the comments, right? I haven't been able to figure that out, but it stands out. You have a whole sea of people, and then you have pink tie, pink guy. He goes and shakes pink guy's hand. Maybe it's nothing, right? So Vince comes out on this Raw, and he's just giving one of these speeches. He's about to introduce John Cena, and he goes, "Raw has been on the air for 1,517 episodes." So it was such a weird number. I was like, I wonder if there's a drop 15, 17 that I should look at, right? So I look at it, and sure enough, what's in that drop? CEO resignations. Wow. What's the date of the drop? 6/16/2018. -1 from, we were so close to that 6/17 right there. But maybe it was 6/17 on, another time zone somewhere in the world, right? But you have a drop 15/17 talking about CEO resignations. This guy just resigned as CEO, and this is actually ends up being, I believe, his last appearance ever in WWE. Television, at least, right? He would come back and do some of the business stuff, do some interviews with the news then, but this was it for Vince. This was his last hurrah. And who does he bring out for this? He brings out John Cena. What's John Cena doing? He's celebrating his 20th year in the business. And 20 spelled out is 107. So another 107 there. 107, John Cena. Juan Cena, remember that was a character, Juan Cena, right? So he ends it with John Cena, the "you can't see me" guy. Which I always thought was interesting, right? Do you smear? VK said. Well, you know who was getting smeared by MSNBC or DNC? It was Juan O'Savin. Juan O'Savin was getting smeared for, the work that he was doing for the Secretary of State elections, right? So you have MSNBC putting a hit piece out on Juan, which I thought was interesting, right? Why give him attention if he's nobody, right? But they were worried because he was, rallying people, Secretary of State candidates to make sure we had safe and secure elections, right? And again, that name, Juan O'Savin, Savin Hill. Remember, we pointed that out. It's the stop before JFK UMass. And right next to JFK UMass Library, I show it on the map in the video, it's Savin Cove. So, you have Savin Cove right here too. So Savin Cove, 107, Savin Hill. It's all JFK Library is on the cove. It's beautiful. Beautiful story, right? All right. So next thing I show you is a commercial from 1999. Now, the All-Star Game for Major League Baseball, that was the last time it was in Boston at Fenway Park. So 1999, they were running a commercial to try to attract people that were in town for the All-Star Game, try to get them to go to the JFK Library, right? So they have a clip of Nixon and JFK debate, which there's a whole section dedicated to that debate in the JFK Presidential Library, and I highly recommend going to the library because you'll see JFK was basically Trump before Trump, right? I remember walking through the halls of this place and hearing a clip of JFK saying, we got to make America great again or something like that. He's saying the same stuff, like America first stuff, right? It's crazy. But it doesn't get portrayed that way, right? In revisionist history, as we like to call it. So going back to Boston, right? We're in 617, and a story that I told here in a couple episodes ago. The Boston Celtics, right? Boston Celtics, they held the record for the most championships in NBA. And what number is that? 17. They have 17 championships. Now, championship is 131. Just so happens John F. Kennedy equals 131 as well. So the champ is here. Champ is here. So, that year, because I was in Boston for this, right? I remember being at the bar and seeing it. I was so, moved by this, right? Because they were going for, and this is in 2022, they were going for championship number 18, right? So before the game at TD Bank Garden, they had the seats arranged, right? And you know how they do designs in the empty seats, so we'll spell stuff out and stuff, right? So one section said 617, 617. The other section said 18, because that's the championship they were going for. So you had 617, 18. So it's cool, right? You got a little R action going there with the 18. Going back to 2008, Celtics won their 17th banner. They won their 17th championship, record-breaking. And who was one of the main people behind that championship? It was Paul Pierce. What was Paul Pierce's nickname? The Truth, right? He was the Truth. So the Truth is 120. Vince McMahon is 120. What are the odds of that, right? My X account, Mr. Drew ENT, that equals 120 as well, right? So I didn't plan that. I didn't know that. I didn't even understand fully gematria when I picked that name. It just happens to work out like that. That's usually how the numbers work out, right? Now, who else is looking for a record-breaking number 17th championship? It's the other guy from Boston, John Cena, right? So he comes back in 2022. He tries to challenge Roman Reigns to win his 17th title. He's unsuccessful, but he went for it at the very least. Don't forget John Cena's grandfather, born on the same day as him, 1917, same year as JFK, April 23rd. So 5 weeks before JFK was born in Boston, and he was a player of the Boston Red Sox. Now, when Fenway had Fenway's first game, I believe the first person to ever throw out the first pitch was Mr. Honeyfitz, right? JFK's grandfather, who threw out the first pitch. He was the mayor of Boston at the time, right? And what was JFK's boat name? It was called the Honeyfitz, named after him. So on my birthday, June 17th, I'm actually at Fenway. I'm in the same, not the same section, but close to the same section where that Ghost of JFK picture or video was posted, where it has somebody that looks like John and Carolyn that are at Fenway Park singing Sweet Caroline. Sweet Caroline, Neil Diamond, who was that named after? He wrote that song for Caroline Kennedy, Sweet Caroline, right? So you have a little Kennedy reference there. Now, there is some wild stuff while I'm at this game. Now, I'm drinking 617 beer because I'm trying to line up all the synchronicities, right? I think I can't remember the seat arrangements, but I think we were row 5, seat 17 and 18. And so the person behind me was sitting in row 6, seat 17. And this guy, he was just dropping, knowledge. He was a season ticket holder since the 70s, he said, right? And he said a story that that I had heard before in my childhood. I remember my dad telling me this story, right? So Roger Clemens years ago had his first 20 strikeout game at Fenway Park, and when he did that, it was also the same night as a Celtics playoff game. So I remember my dad telling me the story that he had tickets to that Fenway game where Clemens ended up doing the 20 strikeouts, but he had a friend in town from wherever the opposing team was. I think it was Detroit, right? So I think they were playing the Detroit Pistons in the playoffs, and he had a friend from Detroit in town. So instead of going to Fenway, for a regular baseball game, they went and got tickets to the playoff game. So this guy who's sitting in seats, row 6, seat 17 behind me, he is telling this story to the guy next to him, and it's the same story. He goes, I was, I had tickets to the Clemens strikeout game, 20 strikeout game, but, I decided to go to the Celtics playoff game instead. And I had to, ask my dad afterwards. I said, Dad, you told me this story before, right? And he goes, yeah, I did tell you that. And we had to look it up online, and sure enough, he's like, oh yeah, Detroit. I remember my buddy was from Detroit, right? So it was just a crazy little sync, right? But here's the other thing that this guy was talking about. This guy also mentioned that I think I had asked the question. I said, hey, when was the last time that they performed, that Neil Diamond actually was here to perform Sweet Caroline? And the guy said it was April 20th, 2013. And that would have been right after the Boston Marathon bombing, right? Patriot Day. So I'm like, okay, that's interesting, right? Sweet Caroline. Now, if you go back to that video that got posted from Junior and Caroline allegedly at Fenway, or the lookalikes, whatever you want to call it, that was 4/20/13. That was the last time Sweet Caroline was performed at Fenway Park by Neil Diamond. So I'm like, okay, right? No biggie, right? The next day, to my surprise, guess who showed up at Fenway Park to perform Sweet Caroline for the first time in 9 years? Neil Diamond comes back, performs Sweet Caroline during the 7th inning stretch. So, again, the universe, maybe I manifested it, I don't know. But just, this is the shit I gotta go through on a regular basis that just, I gotta tell this story, right? It's why I have to do 4 VKMs, because there's just way too many things like this that put a little pressure on you, and you gotta get it out, right? So, nice little sync there, but to say the least, right? All right, let's talk now back to the 1999 All-Star Game. This one blew my mind as well. So Ted Williams, he came out to tip his hat. He never did that when he was with the Red Sox. When he left, he would never tip his hat. And he comes out at his very old age in a wheelchair. He's wheeled out at Fenway Park, this historic day. I think it was it might have been the 100th All-Star Game even. Or it was the All-Century team, I think, that they were unveiling, right? So they were showing all the best players from the last 100 years of baseball. And they bring Ted Williams out. And as they're bringing Ted Williams out, they talk about he played for the Red Sox for 22 years. 22 is MAGA. And then he served in the U.S. Marines for 4.5 more. 4.5, 45 again. There it is, right? So it was kind of interesting to me. Now, he also met JFK back in the day before JFK became president. There's that famous picture of them giving JFK the bat, right? And it's him and a couple other baseball players. So it's very interesting. Now, think of the timing. This is July 1999. We know what happened in July 1999. Who started the All-Star Game for the American League? Who ended up winning that game? It was Pedro Martinez from the Red Sox, right? Who was in the midst of an incredible Cy Young season. I think he won the Cy Young in 99 and 2000, maybe even 98, right? He was just on nobody could beat Pedro. And what number does Pedro wear, right? He wears number 45. So Pedro, the starter, 45, right? So, and he just electrifies in that first inning. The crowd just, it's embedded in your mind, right? Like, just the crowd reaction was just insane. I get goosebumps thinking about it. But he strikes out the side. All 3 batters in the first inning. Place goes nuts, right? Who was the closer in that game? A guy named John Wetland. John Wetland, of course. What number? It couldn't be any other number, right? He wears number 35. So you have 45 the starter, you have 35 the closer. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's not. Maybe 35 is the closer and 45 is the starter. or 45's the closer and 35's the starter. Regardless, it couldn't have been any other numbers. It couldn't have been, 52, 37. No, it had to be 45 started and 35 closed this 1999 All-Star game in Boston. So, who wins the home run derby that year in 1999? Junior. Ken Griffey Jr., right? And he was referred to as Junior. A couple days go by, and the last public appearance by JFK Jr. is on 7/15/1999. And where is he at? Yankee Stadium, watching an MLB game. And that's the last video footage anybody ever had of him. So, crazy. That 1999 All-Star game, it had such a special place in my heart before I, was directed back to it. But then I never realized how important it actually was, right? I mean, it's just crazy. So what else is happening this week that I'm in Boston, right? You have the 122nd U.S. Open. 122 is JFK Jr. Lives 122. Where's it at? It's in Brookline, Massachusetts. What happened in Brookline, Massachusetts? That's the birthplace of JFK. So you got more JFK comms here. And when did it take place? Between 6/16 and 6/19. So 6/17 U.S. Open was going on. Speaking of 6/17, one of the most famous finishing moves in the history of WWE, Stone Cold Stunner. We share a birthday, right? Stone Cold Stunner. First time Stone Cold ever used it on WWE TV, June 17th, 1996. Now, fast forward 2 years later, WrestleMania 14. Stone Cold Steve Austin wins his first WWE Championship. Where is that championship won at? Where is that WrestleMania held at? Boston, Massachusetts. Interesting. Linda McMahon, she would come out to the old WrestleMania theme music, right? So WrestleMania 14, this was the song for it. Goes, and Linda McMahon, I didn't tell you. So Stone Cold is 107. And Linda McMahon also equals 107. What are the odds of that, right? And I talked about this clip, Conquer the Darkness 1. And also in the What is 4VKM video, right? What's going on here? You have Linda McMahon comes out on Monday Night Raw. It's 4/9/2001. 4/9/2001 in Boston, Massachusetts. And JR, the announcer, is talking about this poor woman. She's had to go through so much. Her husband's been embarrassing her, with these affairs and all this other stuff, right? And it's we feel bad for Linda, and I feel bad for Linda today, having to endure all this, people talking about what's going on with Vince and everything like that. So you remember Vince fought Shane, his son, at WrestleMania 17, and this was before she came out. So this would have been a couple weeks before she came out on this Raw. So she comes out. She talks about that match and how there were a lot of rights that were wronged in that match, right? She brings up Mick Foley, right? And I happened to meet Mick Foley in May 2018. Very cool experience. I got to watch Monday Night Raw with him. I knew somebody that was a huge wrestling fan, has a lot of money, and he won a bid. He bid for, and it all went to charity, for the right to have Mick Foley come to your house and watch Monday Night Raw. So this guy invites me over because he knew I was a big wrestling fan, right? He's like, hey, I'll never forget the phone call. He goes, hey, you want to come over to my house and watch Monday Night Raw tonight? And I'm usually, I like staying home, right? So I'm not usually like, yeah, I'll come watch wrestling at your house. But something told me, they're like, say yes. Just say yes to this, right? Yeah, branch out a little bit. So I went out. I said, yeah, I'll go. And he goes, good, I'm glad you said yes. because we're going to have Mick Foley here. Mick Foley, right? So I take the picture with Mick Foley, and you guys see it when Mick Foley is mentioned by Linda McMahon there. And I got to sit right next to him on a couch, and we were talking about Raw, because he at this point he had just left being the GM of Raw, right? So he's come off television, right? And he would be giving his viewpoint on a couple of the guys, right? And and Mick Foley just did a podcast on the whole Vince situation, and his exact words were like something along the lines of, "I hope people remember Vince McMahon for the good stuff that he did." So he didn't totally bury him, which I think surprised a lot of people. And it just shows the respect that Mick and other people like Kevin Nash, not a Trump supporter, right? But he's a Vince supporter, and he's standing up for Vince as well. So those are some of the boys that are kind of like, hey, what's going on is horrible, but let's see what happens. And, Vince has done a lot for all of us. So Linda calls out Vince, right? Remember, I'm at this show, and she says, at this time, I'd like to ask my husband to come to the ring, Vincent K. McMahon. And as soon as she says that, they zoom in on little Mr. Drew in the crowd, right? They have a sign in front of me, and they move the sign. You see my little face wearing my Y2J jersey, right? And what does she come out? She calls Vince McMahon out. So they show me Vince McMahon comes out, and Vince McMahon's like begging with her, like, Linda, I'm so sorry. I've learned my lesson. Let's move on. He gets on his knees, and he says, read my lips, right? Who we talked about earlier? George H.W. Bush, the most famous read my lips guy, right? And what does Linda ask for? Linda asks for a divorce right there. And they ended up getting back together and whatnot, and it all worked out at the end. But Vince was very shocked. I remember looking over my dad. He thought it was hilarious. It was just a fun day, fun memory. And again, what a follow-up from Conquer the Darkness 1, right? I showed that clip in 2020. 2 years later, I'm telling this story about Vince getting in all this trouble. And in storyline, when his wife divorces him because of all these affairs and whatnot, they show me on television, which is just crazy. What a coincidence. So, the video wraps up. Vince is on the Pat McAfee show. And this is before the allegations came out. Remember, this was March 3rd, I think. March 3rd or 4th, 2022. And he's talking about his wife. And he slips. He goes, my wife at the time. Because that's kind of always been the thing. Like, they're together, but they're not together. And guess what came out in that lawsuit? That they're really not together. It's more of like a business arrangement, that why they stay together. So, I'm not going to get into their personal business there. But, again, it's all been laid out in front of you, right? So consider all this when you see the Vince McMahon allegations and all that stuff. It's clear to me, and maybe I'm the only one, but it's clear to me that this seems to have been orchestrated. It seems to be controlled by Vince himself. And why he would put himself in the situation that he's in right now, I have no idea what the benefit of that would be. But the fact that it was all kind of predicted, and it all happened the same way in WWE television that it happened in WWE, or in real life, it just blows my mind. And remember, don't forget, this whole lawsuit that just reemerged, the only reason it reemerged is because Vince stopped paying the NDA money, right? He was supposed to pay $3 million in an NDA, and he decided to stop paying. So, in that regard, he brought this forward by himself, because it's not like he doesn't have $3 million. He probably drops $3 million out of his pocket by accident. So, the then the question is why? Why would he do it? Why would he put himself in this position? What are the odds that he was at a Trump property and the Trump org, building manager introduces him to the woman? I mean, did they know ahead of time? I don't know. But it's there's too much that I've seen for me to just throw Vince McMahon overboard yet, because it's all been in WWE TV. So that's it. That's the episode. And again, I hope this kind of paints some more light on the history of these allegations and all that stuff. I mean, we got it all. We got John Laurinaitis in here. We have Vince, Stephanie and Triple H taking over afterwards, and just June 17th, just so happened, same first day that the woman worked there. Very strange, very interesting. And the last thing I'll say is there's a clip that's been surfaced lately, and people are kind of pointing to this clip as like, oh, see, Vince is guilty, right? And it's so funny when I see some of these people that hate Vince. They're like, yeah, the feds have always been trying to get Vince, but they've never been successful. But this time, they're finally going to get him, right? What does that sound like? That doesn't sound like, due process. That sounds like a witch hunt, right? Which Vince has talked about in the past. He actually compared his first federal prosecution to a witch hunt. And then what was the news that came out? Federal prosecutors are looking at these Vince McMahon allegations, right? So you have the deep state again, right? They just keep coming. But there's this clip from Donahue that Vince McMahon went on Donahue and actually faced one of the accusers, right? Because there's this guy that was accusing WWE at the time of sexual harassment from one of the vice presidents in that company. And because he wouldn't sleep with that vice president, he ended up getting fired. And Vince was like, no, I fired you because you weren't good at your job. Like, that's why I fired you, right? And he goes, why didn't you bring up the allegations then when I fired you? Or why didn't you bring them up when you were leaving? You waited all this time and then brought them up. And here's the very telling point that I see in that interview. He goes, and what happened right before we came out here on TV? You said you would not come out here if I paid you $200,000. And the guy's shocked that he would even say that, right? Vince McMahon literally has balls the size of grapefruits, right? He said it in Storyline. I think it's true because he takes these things head on, and we'll see what happens with this whole Janelle Grant situation, right? Remember his statement, I'm going to vigorously defend the allegations. I can't wait to clear my name. Remember John Laurinaitis' statement. Granted, he said that he was the victim of Vince somehow, but what was Big Johnny's statement? I'm going to vigorously defend. This thing is full of lies, and I'm going to vigorously defend myself. Something about that phrase, vigorously defend, vigorously defend. Vince used it twice, and the only two statements that he's made since this thing happened, and Big Johnny's used it once as well, and the only statement he's made. So, I don't know. We're going to have to wait to see what happens. 4VKM podcast. It's going to be excellent. Don't forget to subscribe to it. But not for nothing, we're probably going to go full-blown Rumble because it looks like YouTube is preventing notifications from going out. The one benefit, the reason why I keep doing YouTube is because we have 17,000 subscribers on YouTube, and I want to reach that audience, right? But for whatever reason, I can only reach about now like 500 to 1,000 every day because notifications, people are telling me notifications aren't getting. So if you do get a notification for this video, please leave it in the comments. Let me know. So maybe I could, maybe it's not as bad as I think. But when I look at the data and I see where the views come from and I see notifications, there's like hardly any. And we have 17,000 subscribers and it wasn't always like this. I find it very strange. So, regardless, Rumble, we love Rumble. Shout out Rumble. Never taking a video down. Check out the link for this video. Macrodosing 4VKM, Conquer the Darkness 2. Check out Conquer the Darkness 1 as well. And don't forget 4VKM.com for all of your 4VKM videos. You can watch them in order. So, whew, this is a long one today. I don't even know. Probably over an hour. Apologies for that. But we'll be back here tomorrow with another episode. And as always, enjoy the show. Red for Red Sox.